Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Korman Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 2, Episode 9, titled So Help Me God. The episode's description reads as follows. Sam must defend a young black woman charged with murdering the son of a powerful Southern political figure. The episode takes place on July 29th, 1957, originally aired on November 29th, 1989. It was directed by Andy Kedoff, who directed 3 episodes of this series and was quite busy otherwise, having directed 81 episodes of Home Improvement, 76 of Hot in Cleveland, and 9 episodes of Last Man Standing. All in all, he directed 74 different projects. It was written by Deborah Pratt, who wore many hats on this series, including co-executive producer. She has one appearance on this series as an actress, A Portrait for Troyan, which is an episode that is coming up, and I am looking forward to absolutely trashing that episode. She would also do the opening narration of this series for 65 episodes, when Quantum Leap finally settled on that. She did the voice of Ziggy in a couple episodes, and reprised that role in a fan film, Quantum Leap, A Leap to Die For. In addition to that, she has acting appearances in Magnum P.I., an appearance on Hunter, and the movie Exit to Eden. She was the producer behind 4 other series, the director of 5 different projects, none of which are Quantum Leap related, and the writer behind 7 other projects. As far as this episode is concerned, it's not the greatest. It's not a terrible episode. It's not a great episode. It kind of ends up somewhere in the middle for me. It mines similar territory as The Color of Truth, last season's episode, but in my mind, The Color of Truth did it better there. Though to be fair, the racism angle isn't really the point of this episode. It's more of just adding flavor to the episode. According to AlicePlace.com, this is one of 5 episodes to take place in Louisiana, 3 of which are the trilogy episodes, and the last, Southern Comforts, in Season 3. Sam leaps in, and he's in the middle of a courtroom. And of course, as usual, he has no idea what's going on with him. The defendant, next to him, is a young black woman named Delilah. He's just been asked a question, and he has no idea how to answer it. So he feebly asks, "Can you repeat the question?" This prompts laughter in the courtroom and exasperation from the judge. The judge is played by William Charlotte, who died on May 8th, 2016 at the age of 93. Of his 388 acting appearances include Inner Space, his last appearance being in Two Broke Girls in 2014, the Stephen King adaptation Bag of Bones, and a run on True Blood. Meanwhile, Delilah is played by Tyra Farrell, who has 48 appearances, including appearances in Chicago PD, 4 appearances on Empire, the movie White Man Can't Jump, Boys in the Hood, and The Exorcist 3. The judge reads the question, which is Delilah guilty or not guilty? And Sam decides that he is there to prove Delilah's innocence. And so he says the words, "not guilty," which sets off a firestorm in the court, including the prosecutor, who laments the fact that they had a deal. Delilah and Sam end up exchanging looks. And the look on her face is, "Why in the heck did you just do that?" And credits. When we come back, Sam is in the judge's chambers. The prosecutor is played by John Shepard, and he has appearances in the movie Sneakers, Clear and Present Danger. Actually, I'm sorry, he's not in Clear and Present Danger. He's in Patriot Games, the Jack Ryan movie that preceded Clear and Present Danger. And he also has an appearance in the 2016 series Banshee. Anyway, the judge and the prosecutor are talking over Sam's decision to plead Delilah not guilty. The prosecutor is extremely mad. Meanwhile, the judge is far calmer. He strikes me as being mostly reasonable during the course of this episode. The judge ends up asking him, "Did the captain know that you intended to plead her not guilty?" And of course the answer to that question is no, but Sam doesn't quite know that yet. The judge is confused as to why Sam would do this, and Sam simply says that she is not guilty, and he tries to come up with some legal terms, including she wasn't read her Miranda rights. The judge has no idea what those are because those were not instituted until 1966. The judge gently suggests that maybe Delilah is making the moves on him and addling his brain. Alright, so when the captain ends up making the same suggestion later in the episode, I found it gross then too, but I find it especially so coming from the judge in this professional setting. That's no doubt because Leonard, the person that Sam leaped into, is not taken particularly seriously. Meanwhile, despite everything that everyone is saying in this chambers, Sam decides to continue on the course. Delilah is not guilty, he insists, and you're going to need to prove it in court. Sam ends up entering the plea of not guilty. As the courtroom clears out, the captain offers him a ride home, which Sam gratefully accepts because he has absolutely no idea where he actually lives, and it's a good way to get information, despite the fact that he isn't like the captain. The captain is played by Brian Pibbin, who, according to Al's Place, was actually a stage actor. In the 1950s, he began his career primarily as a stage actor. He went on to star in such movies as Being John Malkovich, Very Bad Things. He had TV appearances in Miami Vice, The A-Team, Frasier, and The X-Files. The X-Files being a series that I'm going to be talking about very shortly. He died on February 18th, 2002, at the age of 72. The captain and Sam ride home, and they have a conversation, in which he's acting all southern gentleman-like, which belies his darker nature. The captain, as it turns out, is the father of Houston, who Delilah was accused of murdering, and he's absolutely convinced of her guilt. Now, I remember how this episode ended. I remembered it before I sat down to do this rewatch, but I did not remember the captain's reactions at the end of this episode. So I was kind of going into this episode assuming, as I was watching these scenes, that the captain knew what actually happened. But that doesn't seem to have been the case. The captain ends up suggesting, once again, that Leonard only did it because Delilah is an attractive woman who rubbed up against him. This suggestion is being brought up for the second time in the episode, and given the captain's character here, it makes a little bit more sense coming out of his mouth than it did the judge's. The captain's entire thing here is to basically subtly threaten Sam that it would be in his best interests not to see through this course of action. According to Al's Place, there is a blue car that follows behind these two. This car is significant because it appears itself as a character named Dottie's car in 8.5 Months, an episode that occurs later on in the series. After being dropped off, Sam meets up with his wife, played by Stacey Ray, and who is an extremely annoying character. She only has 9 credits to her name, which includes an appearance on In the Heat of the Night, Hawaii Five-0, and the very recent Magnum P.I. reboot. During this scene, we have some clunky dialogue, which includes the revelation that Houston had sexual relations with Delilah when she was at the age of 14. This conversation actually prompts a discussion. In the South, actually throughout the United States, there was miscegenation laws that basically made it illegal to have interracial marriages, as well as engaging in sexual relations with someone who was not a member of your race. These laws were on the books in most states until 1967. Louisiana didn't do away with them until 1972. The punishment for these crimes were severe, and they went against both parties that engaged in these activities. So why am I bringing this up? Well, I find it very hard to believe, given all of this, that Houston's indiscretion with Delilah would be common knowledge, as it is here. So I really don't believe for a second that Sam's wife would know this information, to just clunkily drop it like she does in this conversation. Moreover, there's no particular reason to have that particular information now. It could wait till someone who would be slightly more credible knowing this information and dropping it on Sam. At the very least, Houston having sexual relations with Delilah would be a huge scandal if those facts were known, and a huge problem for his father, the captain. We cut to Sam walking by himself, narrating, mostly saying that all he knew about the law was from a show that he could barely remember the name of. And that's when Al appears to tell him Perry Mason, somehow reading the guy's mind. Al is appearing at the 11 minute and 22 second mark, a curiously late appearance for him. And unlike in the last episode where Dean Stockwell had a meaty role to play, here he's mostly just wallpaper. Apparently, Leonard is not dealing with the leap very well. He's curled up in the fetal position and basically thinking that Al and co. are aliens. We very rarely get information on how the leaper is reacting to being in the waiting room, not this early in the series. And this is where I'll give a little bit of a shout out to a guy who regularly comments on my videos, Mark Davidson, who frequently wonders about the person who Sam is replaced and how they react in the waiting room. In this episode, he doesn't have to wonder because it's spelled out right there. So, he asks Al what Ziggy thinks Sam is there to do. He wants to know if Ziggy thinks he's there to prove Delilah's innocence. And apparently they ran that scenario, and as it turns out, in the original history, Delilah got the 20 years instead of the death penalty. But Sam has changed history. By pleading her not guilty, she now may get the death penalty. And Al asks him, why did you do a thing like that? And Sam replies, because she's innocent, I tell ya. Sam ends up telling Al about the racial bigotry that was in the courtroom, that the women called her a colored whore, which actually I don't recall happening during the courtroom scene. That was his wife that said that. Sam is skeptical that the town, filled with racial bigotry, would let Delilah plea bargain. And Sam says that these people are hiding something, and Sam is going to discover what it is. And this was my thought originally too, that these people were hiding something. Except not really. The captain isn't hiding anything. He genuinely believes that Delilah is guilty. Houston's mother isn't really hiding anything. She's mentally unwell. The one person who is hiding something is Delilah herself. So Sam is sort of onto something here. I mean, really, he would have to be, because what other reason would he be here? But he's got the wrong diagnosis. He's not looking in the right direction. We cut to Sam meeting with Delilah. Sam tells her that he isn't going to let her burn in the electric chair, and she responds that chivalry is not dead while smoking, which I'm kind of surprised that the guards are letting her do, but whatever. Anyway, over and over during the course of this scene, she keeps saying that she killed Houston, and she seems extremely uninterested in defending herself. We cut to Sam in the sheriff's office trying to get the records for the trial, the proof, and information he needs to conduct his trial, but the sheriff isn't too interested in helping out. And once again, nobody seems to be taking Leonard, Sam Beckett, as Leonard, seriously. The sheriff is played by John Appicello, who has appearances in The West Wing, which I saw and remember, as well as appearances in the movie High Crimes, The Kid, and Point Break. All in all, he has 96 appearances to his credit. The sheriff is being obstinate, saying he isn't sure that Sam has the right to those records. And Sam is getting increasingly angry, saying he's the defense attorney. Of course he has the rights. The sheriff says he has to ask Bo, the prosecutor. And Sam, through gritted teeth, says he will wait. So the sheriff calls him, and Bo doesn't seem to be any more inclined to be helpful. Sam, who's finally had enough, threatens them, and he ends up getting the information he requested. We cut to Sam going to the captain's house to talk to Myrtle, one of the captain's servants, who also would remember Delilah. Sam ends up encountering Sadie, Houston's mother, who seems awfully cheerful for having lost her son, because she's basically checked out mentally. What Sam ends up learning from Myrtle is that Houston and Delilah were fighting that night. During this scene, Myrtle reveals that Houston raped and beat Delilah a lot. Now, Sam reacts like this is totally new information, and that's not quite accurate, because he's already learned that Delilah slept with Houston, or in reverse order, however you want to say it, when she was 14. He already had that dropped on him. So this isn't totally new information that they were having sexual relations. And as I was saying before, this is where we should have learned that information. It shouldn't have been dropped on us from Sam's wife, who had no business even knowing that information. It should be revealed now. This should be new information to Sam. She keeps saying that she can't be a witness and takes off. We cut to the courtroom where Sam confronts Delilah with what he knows. But Delilah refuses to say anything, and Sam says to her he can't help her if she doesn't talk to him, tell him what happened. But still, she remains sitting there in silence. The judge asks the prosecutor if he's ready to proceed, and he says he is. He then turns his attention to Sam and asks the same question. But Sam rises and stands there for a little while, enough to go through a commercial break, I might add, and eventually says that he is not ready, which creates a bit of a stir in the courtroom. Sam says that he cannot go on, which is when Al appears, going through the judge. He tells Sam to approach the bench, and both the prosecutor and Sam approach. And Sam ends up saying that his fly is down, and he needs to fix that. So he asks to use the judge's chambers, and the judge agrees to it. In the judge's chambers, Sam asks if he was ever a lawyer, and Al says no, one of your 6 degrees was not from law school. But not to worry, Al has the entire history of law right at his fingertips. And Sam says that this is not a video game. Delilah's life is on the line, and it's his fault. And Al says, I thought so too. But then I remembered what you said about her eyes, that you saw the truth there. And that's probably why you got this gig in the first place. And by the way, I happen to notice that the hand link is now making the usual hand link sounds, and it's even lighting up more. We're getting close to its final form. Al goes on to say that they researched a dozen cases like this one, and that they will mount a heck of a defense, starting with the jury. Back in the courtroom, Sam says that there are no black people on the jury. The prosecutor objects, because of course he does, but the judge overrules him. But he points out to Leonard that there's just one problem, that in order to serve on a jury, you need to be a registered voter, and there are none living in this area. And Sam says, then we must reluctantly accept that the jury and Delilah are equals. And this creates a stir in the courtroom, and Sam sits down. And Al congratulates Sam on his brilliance, though I'm not really sure what he accomplished here with that. The racist jury is still racist. The trial proceeds, and we see a montage of evidence until we get to Bo, who wants to read the confession into evidence. And Al insists that Sam object, and he does so. And the judge naturally asks, on what grounds? And Al tells Sam that it was obtained under duress, and Sam parrots Al. The judge asks Delilah if that's true, and Al goes on to tell him that he can't ask him any questions until they place her under oath. But Delilah refuses to take the stand. So Sam asks if they could see the alleged confession, and he hands it over to Delilah to see if it's accurate. But the problem is, Delilah can't read. We cut to a picnic area where Al and Sam are discussing the case. And Al is all happy because they delayed the ruling on the confession until after lunch, which Sam points out is meaningless if Delilah doesn't get on the stand and deny it. We encounter Sam's wife. Sam is only there to get food for Delilah, and Sam's wife lets off a couple of racial slurs, which Sam calls her out on and says not to talk like that in his presence, and she tries to do it again, but Sam gives her a look, which stops her cold. The captain shows up to jovially threaten Sam and his wife that if he doesn't deviate from the course that he has set, he will ruin Sam forever. We cut to Sam and Delilah in the holding area, in the place where you can have conversations with your lawyer. Sam ends up asking, did he rape you? And she, of course, says, maybe the first time, but after that, it was love. No, Delilah, it was not love. It was perhaps lust and definitely possessiveness, but it was not love. Not in the actual definition of the word. Her entire outlook here is extremely depressing. Understandable, but depressing nonetheless. There is one thing I was curious about. Exactly how old was Houston, especially compared to Delilah? I was always under the impression that he was over the age of 18, that he was an adult at the time. But there doesn't seem to be much to back my opinion up on this. Delilah, throughout the scene, isn't so sure that this was rape, after the first time anyway. But if he were an older man, by modern standards, that would be considered statutory rape. Though, from my understanding, the current regulations about that were not enacted until 1970. And Sam tries to convince her to get on the stand and deny the confession. He reads the confession to her, saying that she says this is true in the name of Jesus, which is what she finally objects to. And Delilah gets upset, saying that it's a lie that she said that. And Sam asks, "This is all a lie, isn't it?" And of course it is. In the courtroom, where Sam thinks he's convinced Delilah to take the stand, she still won't. And so the confession is read into the record. Later, Sam is in the courtroom with Al. Nobody else is around. And Sam asks, "Why do you have to take an oath on the Bible?" And Al says, "Because you have to tell the truth. A lot of good it does some people these days." But Sam points out that Delilah is a God-fearing person. And if she took the stand, she would have to tell the truth. And perhaps that's the reason why she won't. Sam thinks that she is protecting somebody else, someone that means more to her than her own life. And that is when Myrtle comes into the picture. Myrtle still insists that she will not be a witness, that the captain made her swear on the Bible, that if she said anything to anybody, she would be the one going to hell. And then Al points out Galatians. Read Galatians to her. And to me, Galatians seems to mean that if someone is telling you to tell a lie in God's name, then that person will suffer God's judgment. So no, she will not burn in hell, at least according to the Bible. But he will, if you believe in that sort of thing. But these people, and Myrtle specifically, does believe in that. We cut back to the courtroom the next day. Sam is late, which makes Delilah nervous. But then when Sam shows up, she smiles, in relief that he had not abandoned her, which is interesting because she doesn't seem to be too intent on saving herself anyway. Sam decides to call a witness. This next set of events kind of confuses me a little bit. So, Sam has convinced Myrtle to testify, but we don't see that. The next thing we see is Sam calling Sadie to testify, which creates a huge controversy within the court. Everybody objects, especially the captain. Even the judge objects. But Sam has a court order and got a federal marshal to ensure that this would happen. Alright, so Sam believes that Delilah would not get on the stand to testify. He believes that she is protecting someone. And he has correctly surmised that this person is Sadie. But protect her from what exactly? Sam further believes that Delilah shot Houston in self-defense because he was beating on her. Okay, Sam, think this thing through to the end, because you're missing something here. And it doesn't make sense to me that you're missing it. If Delilah shot Houston in self-defense, and Sadie was a witness, all she would have to do to not lie on the stand is just to leave Sadie's name out of it. You just tell that story. You could have Myrtle come in as a witness to abuse, to what was going on, what she heard that night, and then Delilah tells her story. If this were a true story, why wouldn't Delilah tell it? If this were all about keeping Sadie off the stand, then don't say that she was in the room. Don't make her a witness to this, but tell this story. If Delilah testifies to that, then Sadie never has to get on that stand. So what exactly is Delilah protecting Sadie from? Have you thought about that, Sam? Have you thought that all the way to the end? No, you haven't. Maybe you're going to tell me that Sam suspected that Sadie was the one that shot Houston. I don't believe so, because when the truth comes out, Sam is absolutely gut-punched. The truth, of course, turns out to be that Sadie was the one that killed Houston. That Sadie, while Delilah was getting beaten, picked up a shotgun and shot her son. When the truth comes out, Sam is shocked. Delilah isn't. She was saying that it was an accident, and that's why she was protecting her. So Sam was on the right track, but once again got the wrong read. And interesting once again to note that the captain's reaction is complete and utter disbelief and shock. He did not know this piece of information. I believe that he knew that Houston was beating Delilah, and that he did not want Myrtle to testify to that. He didn't want Delilah to get off for reasons of self-defense. But he had no knowledge that Sadie was ultimately the one that pulled the trigger. We cut to Delilah, who has gained her freedom. She's waiting for a bus, and Sam shows up to say goodbye. He gives her a reader and says if she learns to read, she can do anything. He refuses any kind of payment, which I'm sure Leonard will appreciate, and he mentions that Leonard has a new job with a big law firm thanks to his courtroom win. And I'm kind of curious how long Leonard is going to be able to keep that job, because he doesn't strike me as a particularly competent type, especially since nobody in the town seemed to be taking him seriously at all, and he's not going to have Sam Beckett wearing his skin going forward. Delilah gets on the bus and starts taking off, and Sam jogs behind the bus, and then he leaps. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the episode. Not one of my favorites. It's pretty firmly in okay territory. It has some pretty decent performances throughout. In fact, I can't really think of anybody that I specifically object to performance-wise. And it has some good moments and a good ending to this particular plotline. But all in all, I just found it kind of okay. Next week, we'll look at To Catch a Falling Star, which is an undisputed classic of the series, and I'm sure upon rewatch, I'm going to think about the same about it. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my Korman Productions Facebook page. You can buy something on the Korman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Korman Productions, signing off.